This is the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, presented by HoosierIllustrated.com.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to episode 38 of the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast, presented by HoosierIllustrated.com. I'm joined by Kyle Staley. I'm Drew Rosenberg. I have a big show today. It is our Indiana basketball Big Ten preview. Quick note: this is being recorded prior to the Winthrop game, so we'll have nothing on Winthrop or any of that. Just Big Ten preview. We're going to talk a little bit about the non-con schedule, but a lot of Indiana basketball talk today. Kyle, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Got my Jordan flu game going on right now. Got a bit of an allergy problem, but we're gonna get through this. We're gonna power through this episode, and we're going to, I guess, give our predictions of where this Indiana team's going to finish when it comes to the Big Ten play. It's crazy. It's already here. It feels like yesterday was the first game of the season, and then they were going to the Bahamas, but now we're deep into it. We're in the most important part of the schedule here for Indiana.
Yeah, it's been a weird, start to the regular season, I guess. Just kind of, there's been some times you're like, oh, this team looks like they could be very good, and then other times you're like, oh my god, this team could miss the tournament entirely. And lately it's been a lot more of the latter. And it's crazy because you look at the talent on this team and you're wondering, how are they at this point? I want to say 9-3 going into Winthrop. Good chance to get to 10-3, but Kyler, what has kind of been some of your big takeaways from the non-conference schedule?
Inconsistent. I think that's the main thing. So look, obviously going into this non-conference schedule, it was a very controversial one that Indiana had put together because you were just banking pretty much on doing well in the Bahamas. And obviously we went back to that plenty of times, but that's so far back that we don't even really need to discuss it. We know that Indiana didn't perform well, but when you look at, I guess, the Power 4 games that they played or whatever, they did go 2-2. They beat a Providence team that does have some talent, but obviously not at the talent level that like a Gonzaga that they got whipped by. And then they took care of business against South Carolina. And if you back up South Carolina, that might end up being a pretty good win because they've been kind of streaky in a little bit of ways. They've gotten some big wins as well. So I think they just beat Clemson. So obviously that's a pretty good win as far as the net rating and stuff. But it's just from game to game. You just really don't know what Indiana team's going to show up. And obviously they take care of business at home this year. They've beaten the teams that they're supposed to beat. Chattanooga was a tough one. Obviously, they didn't play very, very well. And then obviously they, just have some games where you just don't know about this team. And that's the concerning part going into Big Ten play. But I also look at the positives in a way. I feel like there's been a lot of teams, outside of the Big Ten, in the Big Ten, whatever, that I feel like are starting to peak a little bit. And I think Indiana hasn't peaked yet, which is a good thing because I think once they do click, especially when it comes to the defensive end, I think this team could be very, very dangerous just because of the talent alone, when you look at it. But inconsistency is the main word that I look at when I think of the non-conference slate for Indiana.
Yeah, and the lack of an identity, I guess. When you watch Indiana, there isn't consistency to how they're going to play. It's one game they might rebound the ball well and dominate inside. The other next game they might take 25-33s. Other games they're going to try to push in transition. They're going to try to slow it down. And it's, if you're winning games doing that, it works. But Indiana isn't. I guess, they're 9-3, so you can only say so much. But at this point in the season, Indiana basketball, if want to be, they wanted to be a top 25 consensus team competing, for a Big Ten championship, for a natty. And let's call it how it is. They're behind schedule. You said they haven't hit their peak yet. My concern is you look at last year's team. Last year's team didn't hit their peak till the last 5 games of the year when their season was pretty much already over. And if you only have so much time to hit your peak. Yeah, it's, you have 20 or I guess 18 Big Ten games left. But if you're not able to, I guess, get going before the end of that stretch, now you're putting yourself in an impossible task to get even into the NCAA tournament. And that was kind of what we saw from last year's team.
Yeah, and that's a completely fair point, to make. But I think the month of January is going to be a pretty important month for Indiana. That hasn't been a month that Mike Woodson excels at. He just hasn't done well since there. It's usually around February where he's got that team playing really, really well. But, the month of January, you go into Big Ten play. here's the thing, people aren't very. I think there's a sour taste in people's mouths when you look at that Louisville game. I think that's still lingering a little bit, and then obviously getting blown out by Gonzaga, just realizing that team's not to that level yet, which is a good and bad thing, I guess you could look at. But here's the thing: Indiana's going to go into the Big Ten play with 10 wins already. Not a lot of teams. I don't even think Purdue has 10 wins going into Big Ten play. I could be totally wrong on that, but there's a lot of Big Ten teams out there. Quote unquote, have had better non-conference slates, but don't have as many wins as Indiana. That's the good thing when you've got 10 wins going in to your conference play.
Kyler, I want to counter though. I mean, Purdue is, they're 8-4 right now, but they hold a win over Alabama.
That's fine.
They have losses. I guess it's Marquette, Texas A&M, and Auburn. I guess Penn State wasn't a great loss, but they beat Ole Miss, so they do have, they have some very good non-conference wins. That's something Indiana doesn't have, which is
here's also another thing too. Think about the Marquette. Think about the Auburn games. They got blown out. Blown out. So they aren't even at their level that they want to be at too. But this is an Indiana pod, not a Purdue pod. But here's the thing: it's just consistency is the main thing for Indiana. You got to be happy to a certain extent that they have at least 10 wins, because the more wins that you have, obviously the better chance that you make the NCAA tournament, and you've got to win games. It hasn't been pretty in convincing fashion, but I would say it's a lot better than what the team was last year, winning these non-conference games where you're expected to win by 15 plus and you're only winning by a couple of possessions. So Big Ten play is going to be really important, obviously, for Indiana, and especially the month of January, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is with like a Purdue versus IU comparison. If you have a Purdue team, let's say Purdue finishes the year with like 23 wins, and IU finishes with like 26, but Purdue has those non-conference wins, and that becomes a huge separator between the two, even though IU is a better record because of the resume. And Woodson didn't want to stack the non-conference schedule because of what happened last year, where you got blown out by UConn, struggled, beat Louisville, but lost a game against Kansas you should have won. And that, like, the non-conference has really not been good for Woodson over the past. Arizona wasn't good. I know I'm missing a few games in that. Like, Woodson has struggled in these big-time non-conference games. It's just the truth since he's taken over. He's had some success in some big games, including against Purdue. I want to say Wodson's 3-3 against Purdue?
That sounds right. I think that's right.
Yeah, because split first year, swept second year, and got swept last year. So Woodson, it's not been like a complete disaster like a lot of people make it out to be. But the non-conference schedule, getting Indiana ready to play these games early, has not been good, and he talks about it. It's been the same thing over and over. He's repeatedly said he's got to get them ready to play. And at what point is it, maybe he hasn't been able to get them ready, and it's a consistent issue at this point.
I feel like he is, though. I know we're kind of digging in some weeds here and stuff. I do feel like as of late, he has took a lot of the blame when it comes to how this team's playing and stuff. It seems like he's getting a little bit more frustrated with how this team plays. I mean, the Chattanooga game, he called his starting group atrocious out there. Not a lot of coaches do that. So hopefully that kind of lights a fire into him as well. But here's the thing, too. It's like you look at the Big Ten as a whole, and I guess we can kind of jump into there and wrap up this non-conference conversation. But you look at the Big Ten as a whole, I think it's a lot deeper than what it was last year.
Yeah.
I think there's plenty of opportunity for Indiana to get some really quality wins in the Big Ten. And that's the same with any other team that's going into the Big Ten that hasn't gotten that, marquee win or anything. The best wins Indiana's got so far this year is against South Carolina and Providence. You go in, even this Rutgers game that we'll get into the Big Ten schedule, but you look at this Rutgers game on tap. I know they haven't really been the best of Big Ten team this year or whatever, but that'd still be a really good win when you look at, the net ratings and all that stuff. So plenty of opportunity. I don't think it's panic button time yet at all. I think Indiana's got plenty of opportunity when it comes to this Big Ten team or Big Ten schedule. And honestly, it just comes down, can Indiana take advantage of it?
Yeah, I mean, my thing is right now, panic button has not been hit. But if you lose to Rutgers at home and then you lose to Penn State and you start the Big Ten schedule 1-3, then it's time to hit the panic button in my eyes.
Could be. Yep. Honestly, could be. So you just got to take it a game at a time. Like Mike Woodson says, you got to take it a game at a time.
Agreed. So let's jump into Big Ten predictions. Kyler, 20 Big Ten games, Indiana's already 1-1 with a win over Minnesota, loss to Nebraska. What do you kind of see as a record estimate for Indiana in the Big Ten?
So the people that are listening to this know that I'm a pretty optimistic guy when it comes to Indiana. Just kind of buying into them or whatever. That is not changing. I'm going to still be the exact same way this year. I see Indiana going 14-6. When I look at, and I think that's what I projected them last year. Obviously, we know how that turned out, but
Yeah,
I think 14-6 is going to be what Indiana does. I mean, look, like I said, there's plenty of opportunity for Indiana to get some quality wins here, and I think it starts in January. Pretty much dead even when it comes to away games, road games. That's pretty much the same with any Big Ten team. But I think 14-6 is very realistic. I think you can say about what Mike Woodson does on coaching on the floor or anything like that. I think there's going to be a lot of games where the talent level of Indiana is just going to be the main factor. And I think talent alone is going to win some games. There's the argument of it's Jimmy's and Joe's, not X's and O's. I think a lot of those games this year, Indiana having the most talent on the floor and them being able to do their thing individually, I do think that they can win some games. So obviously I see them winning versus Rutgers. I think Rutgers is a young team. And then they play at Penn State. Following that, Penn State's a really good team. Really, really good team. And I think that they'll struggle. They've struggled with Penn State before. And then I've got Indiana. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Winning their next 6, which is kind of crazy. That's obviously not going to happen, but I do think that they can do that. And then dropping a couple when you get to Purdue, I just don't see a way that they win that game. Luckily, I do think this is the year that they can split that. Losing at Washington, or not Washington, losing at Wisconsin. Just a place that Indiana has really struggled at, and it looks like Wisconsin's still going to have a pretty solid team, and I just don't know if Indiana can get over that hump when it comes to that stuff. But and then obviously going on the road, winning versus Michigan will be a really good one, I think, and then going on the road to Michigan State will be tough. I don't think that they win that one, and then I have them winning their next 4. That's where, towards the end of that, they start their West Coast trip, Washington and Oregon. So I see them beating Washington, losing to Oregon. And I just see them finishing off the season with a win against Ohio State, which will probably be senior day. So, pretty optimistic. I have them finishing at 14-6, a 24-8 record overall. I think that's plenty good enough for them to make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I think if they do that, they're most likely looking around a 4 or 5 seed in the tournament. I am not as high as you. That's usually how it goes. You're usually the optimist. I'm usually the pessimist on this pod.
Yin and yang.
Yeah, I've been back and forth between kind of in that 9-11 range to 12-8. I'm gonna go. I think officially, I'm just gonna rock with 10-10. I think Indiana's what I've seen from this team has not been good enough. I think just based on what I've seen before, I lean more towards that, 8-12 kind of side. But the talent and the upside is still there. I mean, there's so much talent. It hasn't looked like it, but this is still one of, if not the most talented roster in the Big Ten. And talent can win you so many games. So with one of those things like that, I think Indiana is going to win a lot of games just because of that, and I think they'll finish around that 10-10, which would probably put them right on the bubble of the NCAA tournament with 20-13 record, and would probably have some work they'd have to do in the Big Ten tournament unless they can get a win against Purdue, maybe a win over UCLA, Michigan State, because there is, I mean, the Big Ten. It's not like the Big Ten last year where there was not that much talent. It's the Big Ten's back to being what the Big Ten has always been, a very talented, powerhouse conference. So there is going to be opportunities for Indiana to earn signature wins on the road too.
Yep. That's where you win the Big Ten, right? You win on the road. And Indiana's got to do that. I'm not going to say Indiana's going to win the Big Ten. That's not even my prediction here, but I think a 14-6 record on my end, I do think that's probably one of the top 5. You would say somewhere around there. Yours is obviously more in the middle of the pack, but I think with yours, the big thing is you obviously don't want to be a bubble team because that's what Indiana's been for a long, long time. And they're always on the outside looking in. And I think we got to get away from that. For Mike Woodson to feel safe about his job as well. You got to get away from that bubbles team. And honestly, they got to be a team when it comes to January. Like January is such a big stretch for Indiana. They got to be a team where they're, solidly in the NCAA tournament, all the projections or whatever. But I just think that this team can really rack off a lot of wins at one point in this season.
Yeah.
Obviously, I have the first 2 games, and then I have them winning their next 6. So that's crazy to think of with this team, but it's doable. I think it's doable. Big thing for me as well, you got to protect home floor, and Indiana didn't do a good enough job of that last year. You got to protect home floor because that goes a long way when it comes to doing well in your conference play.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean that's kind of been, I guess, other than last year, Woodson had been great at home and struggled on the road. And India needs to find that balance. They need to figure out winning on the road in the Big Ten. It's not easy, but you got to find ways to do it. If you're going to be a top team, that's what this team has aspired to be at the beginning of the year. This isn't a team that, came into the year like we want to make the tournament. No, they wanted to win, go far, try to win the Big Ten and do all these. They want some hardware. Let's call it how it is.
Yep.
And I don't want to say Woodson's job depends on it, but if Indiana isn't at least competing for, a Big Ten regular season championship or a, winning some tournament games or, maybe doesn't make it to the Big Ten tournament championship, Woodson's job is 100% in jeopardy just based off of what we've kind of seen this season. And it's kind of concerning what we've seen with the amount of talent, in my eyes, at least so far. Yes, it's only 12 games into the season, but it hasn't looked like there's been progression from game one. I can't definitively say Indiana basketball is better now than they were in November.
No, I don't think anybody can. And that goes back to the inconsistency part of this team because you just don't know what team's going to show up when it comes to that. But, here's the thing. Obviously, when it comes to the non-conference schedule, you wanted Indiana to win these games by 15-plus points, have that nice gap that's been up and down this year when it comes to team game by game. But when it comes to the Big Ten play and stuff, you just got to find ways to win at the end of the day. You got to win your conference games, and winning does matter at this point. It doesn't matter how much you win by. It just matters. And especially when you go on the road, win ugly if you have to. Make it an ugly game. And I think there's going to be a lot of games with this Indiana team. There's going to be a lot of ugly games this year, and it's just all about finding ways to win those ugly games. Yeah. And look, I'm being pretty hard, when it comes to Indiana's defensive, play right now. I think Indiana goes as far as what their defense can take them. I think the offense is there for Indiana. I think they have a lot of versatility on that end. It just comes down to defense and getting stops and getting kills and things like that. If Indiana doesn't improve on the defensive end, they're not going to win a lot of games. And 10-10 looks about right when it comes to your record and stuff. If they don't, progress on the defensive end and they're just trying to win games via a shootout, they're not going to win a lot of games shootout. They tried that with Nebraska. Didn't work because they got cold at pretty much the worst time you could possibly get cold in a game. So just find ways to win. The Big Ten play, it's going to be a battle like it is every single year. Every single game is going to be tough. And Indiana's just got to find ways to win games on the road. And then you have to protect home floor throughout the whole entire rest of the Big Ten slate.
Yeah, it's simpler said than done, but it's, they have the talent to do it. We've talked about it. The talent is there. There isn't last year you looked at the roster and there was a talent issue. Indiana wasn't deep enough, especially in the backcourt. This year, there's no questions they should have the talent to do it. And they just haven't put it together. But again, we've said it. They're 12 games in. There is still time to right the ship. But time is starting to tick as you've cut later in the year. And Indiana digs himself further and further into a hole. But Kyle, let's move to our Big Ten league predictions, I guess is the word there. Kyle, who do you have as your player of the year in the Big Ten?
Player of the year, I'm going to go with Ace Baldwin out of Penn State. I do think the Big Ten, player of the year is still kind of up in the air. I think a lot of people, the unanimous decision was Braden Smith, and he's had a really good season right now. But that Purdue team, kind of like Indiana, not to the extreme of what Indiana is, still trying to figure things out a little bit as well. I think Braden Smith's probably a good guess as well to win Big Ten Player of the Year, but I really like what Ace Baldwin's doing. I think that Penn State is going to be a team that improves a ton. You could even look at them as being a sleeper team this year to win it. And I think Ace Baldwin, his stats, he's almost averaging a double-double when it comes to points and assists. He's a really good player, really, really special player, and he's the type of player that will probably give Indiana fits when they play them twice this year. So I like what Ace Baldwin's doing. He's leading a really, really good Penn State team, and he's just being kind of an alpha on the floor right now. So I'm going to go with Ace Baldwin.
I have two guys I want to name. I think this guy is, I think, the best player in the conference right now, but if his team success is going to hold him back from winning Big Ten Player of the Year, and it's Dylan Harper. I think as a freshman, he's quickly established himself as one of the best players in the country. I know all the hype this offseason, it's been Cooper Flagg, how good Cooper Flagg is, and Cooper Flagg is special, but we've seen Dylan Harper. He's already, shown flashes of his brother with the late game confidence, hit a big buzzer beater against in-state rival Seton Hall, averaging 23, 5, and 4 on the year. Wow, low turnover numbers, plays hard on both ends, and Rutgers can be so dangerous. I know they're 7-5 and they have not looked great, but the talent of Harper and Ace Bailey alone, they're going to win some big games. And don't be surprised when they knock off some big teams throughout the year. But because of their struggles as a team, I'm going to also give one more name, to John Tonje from Wisconsin. Colorado State transfer. Dude, just so good at getting to the free throw line. And when he does get to the free throw line, he knocks him down. 94% free throw shooter this year on almost 8 attempts a game. Dude, really just savvy player. You can tell he understands the college game because he's able to, manipulate angles like that. Like, you see it a lot, like, just very good NBA players. Like, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a perfect, guy to, kind of compare it to, is the way they're able to draw fouls. And it's not so much they're forcing it to draw fouls. It's just the way they play. It naturally draws fouls. And Tonje, in the college game, if you can get to the free throw line consistently, you're going to be so tough to guard. And Tonje does that really well.
So neither one of us are going with Braden Smith to be Big Ten Player of the Year.
I just think Trey Kaufman-Renz, he's been too good, and where it becomes they have – it's not a clear number one with Purdue as much as we thought it was going to be going into the year. And I think that's more of a compliment to Trey Kaufman-Renz than it is anything about Braden Smith, because Braden Smith is so talented and is one of the best guards in the conference without a doubt. But him and TKR, when you have that combo, it's hard for two guys, both to put up the numbers to win an award like this when they're both producing like they are.
I agree. And I want to ask one quick question. This wasn't going to be on our format for today, and we weren't even going to really touch this, but first team all Big Ten. Do you think that there's a player on Indiana that can get to first team all Big Ten? If so, who is it?
That can or will?
Can. Okay,
because I don't think anyone on Indiana will. If I'm going to say someone can, it's hard. I guess the obvious answer would be Rice, Renew, or Ballo, I guess, but I just don't see the roster, the way the roster is constructed. I just don't see anyone having the numbers to do it. If someone is going to do it, I'll say Miles Rice, just because he could get that, double-figure scoring range, and the assist numbers could grow with the guys around him, and that's kind of his big benefit. But we've seen it all year long. There's going to be games Malik Renew scores 20. There's games Mbako scores 20. Games Ballo dominates. Games Carlisle is going to score a lot. Games Rice is going to score a lot. And it's kind of been that back and forth all year, where it's not a clear number one option on Indiana. Kyler, let me ask you that. Do you think there is a number one option on Indiana right now? And if there is, who is it?
I do. That's pretty – I think the number one, and this is who I was going to pick, that a guy that can make to get on a first team all Big Ten. I'm going to go with Malik Renew. I do think that he is option one, and he was option one last year in a lot of ways as well. I thought he was option one ahead of Khalil Ware a lot of times. I think Malik Renew is the most consistent player on this Indiana team, and he's a guy that you can give the ball to, not to the extent of what Trace Jackson Davis was, but you can give the ball to him like, hey, Malik, go get us a bucket, and he'll find a way. He'll slither through the front court and figure out a way to get a bucket. Yeah. And I do think that Malik Renew, I don't know if it's going to be first team all Big Ten. I do think that he could make second team all Big Ten. I don't think that's out of the stretch at all. But I think this is going to be the year where Malik Renew kind of gets his flowers in a lot of the ways, because I think he is going to stand out for this team. Miles Rice is another guy. We saw what he did against Nebraska. That's the type of Miles Rice that Indiana needs. If they have that type of Miles Rice, this team's projections, grow tremendously. So I do think Malik Renew could make it. It's funny to think, at the very beginning of the season, we were looking at a guy like McKenzie and Baco that could probably do it. Consistency is a big thing with him. It's just like with this other team. But I agree with you. This team is just too balanced in a little bit of a sense because you don't know who's going to go off from night in, night out. And I think that could be, a factor because numbers do matter in a lot of ways. But I do think the most consistent player, Malik Renew, I think he is the number one option to an extent. And I think he has the best chance to make an all Big Ten team, I would say.
Okay. Let me ask you, who do you kind of have as a sleeper? You can give one or two teams, sleeper teams in the Big Ten.
Don't freak out on me. It's Indiana is my sleeper team.
Wow. Okay.
Indiana is my sleeper team because I think people, national media wise or whatever, they've jumped off the Indiana bandwagon. But look, we've already went deep into what Indiana can do. I think once it clicks, and I do think it will click, once it clicks, this Indiana team can be really, really dangerous. Mm-hmm. And, we could get to February. If they have a really good January, we can get to February and be like, hey, wait a minute, this Indiana team might win the Big Ten. But it all starts in January. They've got to win some games. They've got to be tremendous in January. So my sleeper team is Indiana. If I can't pick Indiana, it'd probably be Penn State because I really like what Penn State's doing.
I think with, you have 18 teams in the conference now. There's so many, and I think both, Indiana and Penn State are definitely sleepers. Penn State, we saw what they can do. They beat Purdue earlier this year. You mentioned Ace Baldwin, and there is the talent there. I'm going a little bit different direction. I'm going to give two teams kind of just honorable mentions. I'm going to say Rutgers, just that the talent of those two freshmen, they're going to win some games, and they're going to win some big games against some really good teams just on the backs of those guys. I don't know if they're going to be able to right the ship enough to get them into the tournament, but the talent of those two guys is going to allow them to maybe cause some damage and make some noise throughout the season. And then Maryland, another, led freshman. Derek Queen has been awesome for them this year. And I just think they have the ability to knock off some good teams, and they'll probably finish higher in the Big Ten than a lot of people think. But my sleeper team is Michigan. Okay. Before the year, I didn't think Michigan had the roster to be this good. I was confused how, the way the roster was built, 2 7-footers starting. I didn't really see how it would work. And it really has worked. Surprisingly, the Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf combo, it works a little bit. And I love Danny Wolf's nickname. I don't know if you've heard this, Jewish Joker.
That is a good one.
Because, if you watch him, obviously he's not Nikola Jokic, but he has very similar tendencies. A very good passer. I think he's had a triple-double this year. Averages 12, 10, and 4 assists. They have a balanced scoring attack. Roddy Gale Jr. from Ohio State came in. Trey Donaldson. 4 guys averaging in double figures. Namari Burnett's averaging 9 a game. The balance is there. Dusty May can coach. We know that. Indiana fans are probably very upset that Dusty May is in Ann Arbor and not in Bloomington. I know a lot of them are. I've talked to a lot of them that are. But just that Michigan team, I think, has the potential to surprise some teams. I don't think they're going to win the Big Ten, but I think they very likely could finish at the top, towards the top of the conference, when a lot of people didn't even think that was in the realm of possibilities before the year.
What front court are you taking? Theirs or Indiana's?
I think talent-wise, it's Indiana, but production-wise right now, I think they've produced better and have been kind of more complementary to one another just because of Danny Wolf's passing.
Yeah, and that's you also got to give credit to Omar Ballo too. He's became a really, really good passer.
He's gotten a lot better as a passer, but I think it's a little different. I just think Danny Wolf is. I think Ballo's making the right plays, and that's been the growth for him. He's Wolf isn't just making the plays you're supposed to make. He's also making the extra ones, the passes that he's making stuff happen. Where Ballo, it's kind of the doubles are. Sorry, the dog in your back just threw me off. Yeah. Great podcasting from us right now. But the doubles, I guess, for Ballo, it's been reading the double teams, and his growth from Arizona, it's been huge. It's so obvious when you watch him. He's no longer waiting for the double team. As soon as they show double, he's making the pass and making the right read. Versus with Golden, it's a little bit different. He's more kind of creating instead of reacting in a sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do think that Indiana should probably feature Omar Ballo a little bit more, especially when it comes to the Big Ten play. He's got to be featured. Mike Woodson said this is the first time he's really ever been featured. Well, I disagree with that because I don't think we featured him as much as what Malik Renew's featured or whatever. But Yeah, I mean, I really like Omar Bell as a project for progression, obviously this year or whatever. But if he can get his numbers up a little bit more, especially when it comes to rebounding, I think Indiana could really excel at that. And
Yeah.
still think Indiana has the best front court in the Big Ten. Kind of like the argument that they kind of made last year. Just obviously didn't have the pieces around them. But if this team obviously does have the pieces around them, I think the front court could really, really benefit. And plus, I think it's been kind of overlooked a little bit. I think Mike Woodson's done a pretty good job with his front court rotations this year. He hasn't overplayed Omar Ballo or Malik Renew a ton, I don't think. And he's been smart about it. And look, there was the Minnesota game, I think, where the front court won them the game. So they're gonna win a lot of games just based on that front court. But I cannot wait until Michigan does play Indiana because I think that's going to be a really, really fun front court matchup.
All right, let me ask you last question before we wrap. Big Ten champion, who do you got?
UCLA. Got them. My logic is kind of similar when it came to football. In a ways, it's a new team and it's a new style that the Big Ten hadn't seen. Oregon came in and showed a new style that the Big Ten hasn't really seen, and they ran the table. I don't know if UCLA is going to run the table, but I do think that they have a lot of talent. They just got a big win over Gonzaga. Gonzaga team that blew out Indiana. I think UCLA's got a lot of talent, and they've got a lot of ways that they can beat you by. And I think they're going to come in and they're going to disrupt a lot of the Big Ten plays. The teams like Purdue, teams like Wisconsin, Indiana, even Michigan State. I think they're going to have a hard time adjusting to the style of UCLA and how they play. And I think that they're just really, really balanced. So give me UCLA to win the Big Ten.
I had a few teams I was looking at. I want to give UCLA was one of them. Also, Oregon, I think they're very good. My preseason Big Ten Player of the Year pick, Jackson Shelstad, has not been as good as I thought he'd be. I mean, still averaging, 10, 3, and 3. Just the shooting clip, he's shooting under 36 from the field, under 30% from the 3. Just has not been good enough. But I'm going to go a team you did bring up, Michigan State. This isn't like when you look at Michigan State rosters of the past, this isn't Woodson Izzo's most talented team, but they play hard, they play the right way, and they have one of my favorite freshmen in college basketball that's very under the radar, Jace Richardson. A lot of Big Ten fans probably remember his dad, Jason Richardson. They're not, the same player, but Jace Richardson is really talented. Comes off the bench for them, averaging 10, 3, and 2. Probably he might be a favorite for 6th man of the year in the conference right now, just based on how good he's been off the bench. I think the balance, they score in so many different ways, you don't know where it's going to come from. I want to see Xavier Booker take that step for them, though. He hasn't taken that yet, and that's kind of my big question with them. Because they don't have, I don't want to say, knock their talent, but they don't have, the elite talent of some of the other schools they're competing with. Jeremy Fears, is a high-touted guy, so is Booker. I like Cohen Carr a lot, too. He's one of the most athletic guys in the Big Ten. And I just think Izzo's probably still the best coach in the Big Ten. Yeah, he hasn't probably shown that as of late. Painter's, been the guy. But I think when Izzo has a team that kind of fits his identity, and it seems like this team does, the gritty, they want to get out, as soon as the ball goes through the basket, they want to inbound it and push, and this team likes to do that. And I think they could really make some noise and win the Big Ten this year.
I'm not fully on the Michigan State bandwagon, just simply the fact that I think Enzo's kind of had a decline a little bit over the past few years. But I'm not knocking how great of a coach he is or anything like that. You mentioned it. I don't think Michigan State is the most talented team that Izzo's had, but they are good and they adapt to his coaching style. I just don't know if that's enough to win the Big Ten. I think they're easily an NCAA tournament team. And then obviously you see what Izzo can do in March. But to me, I just don't know. I feel like they're missing one or two things. And maybe that is Xavier Booker taking that next step.
Yeah.
But still a good pick. Not as good as mine, but it's a good pick.
You went first, so you got the, I was leaning, UCLA, I think Purdue's another one, obviously, that could easily win. Illinois is another team to mention. I mentioned Maryland as a sleeper. Don't be surprised if they go and win the Big Ten. The Big Ten is deep this year. It's not like last year where you had 3 or 4 good teams and the rest were kind of
Yeah.
This year, you probably have 10 to 12 teams that very easily could make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I agree. It's here, Drew. It is here. It's time
Yeah.
to see what this Indiana team's about. It's going to be a very, very big couple months, either
Yeah.
positive or negatively.
Exactly. For all things Indiana basketball coverage, IU football recruiting, it's been a big winner transfer portal. Lewis Moore, former IU safety, went to Ole Miss for a year, came back. There's so much, all of it. We got you covered on HoosierIllustrated.com. Make sure you're following Indiana_FRN on Twitter and Facebook and checking out the website because we'll have stories, podcasts, videos, everything you could need for Indiana sports content. We'll have you covered. And we've also partnered with Tom Brady's company Autograph to streamline our coverage. So download the app, use the code IndianaFR, and you'll be able to see all our stuff on there as well. Thank you for tuning in to the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast. We'll be back next week.